In 13th century Venice, if you were a glassmaker, you lived on a prison island. Not as punishment, as policy. The Republic of Venice had decided that the secret of glassmaking was too valuable to let walk out the door. So they moved every furnace, every craftsman, every apprentice to the island of Murano, and they stayed there. If a glassmaker tried to leave Venice without permission, the government could legally order his assassination. Not arrest, assassination. That's how much this material was worth. And here's the thing, it wasn't just about pretty vases. The knowledge locked up on that island would eventually give us microscopes, telescopes, eyeglasses, windows, fiber optic cables, and the screen you're watching this on right now. The history of glass is, in a very real sense, the hidden history of human civilization. And you almost never think about it. Let's change that. Hey, welcome to Object Origins, where we dig into the history of things in a way that actually makes sense. I'm your host, and today we're going deep on one of the most consequential materials ever discovered by accident on a beach. Or so the story goes. Here's what we're covering today. We'll start at the very beginning, a campfire on a Phoenician beach, and a legend that may or may not be true, but is absolutely worth knowing. Then we'll move through Roman glass, all the way to Venice, and that island of trapped craftsmen. After that, we'll trace how a simple piece of shaped glass triggered the scientific revolution. Lenses, eyeglasses, microscopes, telescopes, Galileo. Then we'll land in the modern world, windows, fiber optics, your smartphone screen, and finish with something that I think will genuinely shift how you see your day-to-day life. Stay for the last point, because the final reframe is the one that got me when I first put this together. Let's go. So, where does glass come from? The honest answer is, we don't know exactly. Humans have been working with naturally occurring glass, obsidian, volcanic rock, for tens of thousands of years, using it to make blades and tools. But manufactured glass, glass that humans deliberately created, is a different story. The oldest manufactured glass objects we've found date back to around 3,500 BCE in Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, mostly beads and decorative glazes. But the how of the first discovery? That's where the legend comes in, and it's a good one. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, tells a story about Phoenician merchants sailing along the coast of what is now Syria or Lebanon. They pulled their ship ashore on a beach near the mouth of a river, and when they went to cook their meal, they couldn't find rocks to prop up their cooking pots. So they grabbed blocks of natron, a naturally occurring salt they were transporting as cargo, and used those instead. They lit their fire. The natron heated up. The natron mixed with the sand beneath it. And when they looked in the morning, there was something strange and translucent where the fire had been. According to Pliny, that's how glass was born. Now, quick note here, and this matters. Historians today consider this story almost certainly apocryphal. The chemistry works in principle, but a beach campfire almost certainly doesn't generate enough heat to actually fuse sand and natron into glass. The real origins were probably gradual, likely tied to kiln-based pottery and faience production in Mesopotamia. But here's why I'm telling you this story anyway. It captures something true about glass, even if the details aren't. Glass is fundamentally sand and fire. Silicon dioxide, the main component of sand, heated to extreme temperatures, mixed with the right minerals, becomes something completely new, something transparent, something that changes what humans can do and see. The legend gets the spirit right, even if it gets the facts wrong. And in the history of glass, that tension between legend and reality is going to keep coming up. For most of its early history, glass was a luxury item. Egyptian glass, Mesopotamian glass, these were rare, precious things. Colored, opaque, used mostly for jewelry and decoration. Transparent glass existed, but was expensive and difficult to produce consistently. Then, somewhere around the 1st century BCE, glassblowing was invented, almost certainly in the region of present-day Syria or Israel. And that one technique changed everything. Suddenly, glassmakers could produce vessels much faster, much more cheaply, and with much thinner walls. Thin walls meant more transparency. More transparency meant more usefulness. The Romans took glassblowing and scaled it. Roman glass workshops spread across the empire, from Syria to Egypt to Italy to the Rhine Valley. By the height of the Roman Empire, glass bottles, jars, and cups were common enough that ordinary households owned them. This was the first democratization of glass. It went from being a luxury of pharaohs to being a practical material in kitchens and markets. Roman glassmakers also experimented with flat glass, and this is where something architecturally significant began to happen. Around the 1st century CE, the Romans started producing small panes of flat glass for windows. Not widespread, not cheap, not particularly clear, but the idea was there. Light could come into a building while keeping weather out. That idea was sitting quietly in the background, waiting for someone to develop it further. That someone would come much later. But first, Venice. By the time the Western Roman Empire fell in the 5th century CE, many advanced crafts went into decline or fragmentation. Glassmaking survived, but the center of gravity shifted. And by the medieval period, one city had quietly become the dominant force in European glassmaking: Venice. Venice's relationship with glass went back centuries, but it was in 1291 that the Venetian government made a decision that turned glassmaking into a state secret. They ordered all the glassmaking furnaces in Venice to be moved to the island of Murano, officially for fire safety reasons, since glass furnaces were a genuine hazard in a city built largely of wood. But the relocation served another purpose. Murano became a controlled zone, a gilded cage. The glassmakers of Murano were granted extraordinary privileges. They were nobility. Their children could marry into Venetian aristocratic families, which was essentially unheard of for craftsmen at the time. They had their own governance, they were celebrated, and they were completely, deliberately isolated. Because what Venetian glassmakers had developed by the 13th and 14th centuries was genuinely extraordinary. They had refined techniques for producing glass that was clearer, thinner, and more consistent than anything else in Europe. Their cristallo, a nearly colorless, highly transparent glass, was the most prized material of its kind in the world. Kings and popes paid enormous sums for Venetian glassware. The technique was the product, and the product was the empire's competitive edge. So the rule was simple: the knowledge stays on the island. Glassmakers who attempted to leave Venice and take their skills abroad could be, and sometimes were, hunted down. Venetian authorities reportedly had the legal authority to imprison the families of glassmakers who fled, and in some documented cases, to order the assassination of the craftsmen themselves. This wasn't paranoia. Competing powers, notably the Habsburg Empire, actively tried to lure Venetian glassmakers away with promises of wealth and protection. The secret was that valuable. This is one of the more remarkable chapters in the entire history of glass. A group of craftsmen so skilled that their government both elevated them to nobility and treated them as prisoners. The tension between those two things, honor and captivity, lasted for centuries. Now here is where the history of glass stops being about trade and luxury and becomes something much bigger. Because the same techniques that made Venetian cristallo so clear and consistent also made something else possible: lenses. The earliest recorded mention of eyeglasses dates to around 1286 in northern Italy, almost certainly connected to the glassmaking traditions of the region. The idea was almost shockingly simple. A piece of glass, ground and shaped into a specific curve, could bend light in a way that corrected human vision. For people who were farsighted, this was transformative. Monks and scholars who had been forced to stop reading as their eyesight declined could suddenly work again. Scribes, scholars, craftsmen, people whose productive lives were measured in the sharpness of their vision, could now extend those lives by decades. That's already significant, but it's what came next that changed everything. Hold on to this sequence because it's one of the most consequential chains of cause and effect in the history of science. If you can grind a lens to correct farsightedness, you can experiment with other lens shapes. And if you put two lenses together, a convex and a concave lens, at the right distance from each other, you get something unexpected. You get magnification. The first compound microscope was built around 1590, most likely by Dutch spectacle makers. The Janssen family is often credited, though the history here is genuinely contested. The first telescope followed in 1608, again in the Netherlands, credited to Hans Lippershey, also a spectacle maker. And then, in 1609, Galileo Galilei, who had heard about the telescope and built his own improved version, pointed it at the sky. He saw the moons of Jupiter. He saw that they moved. He saw that they were orbiting Jupiter, not the Earth. And that one observation, made possible by two pieces of shaped glass in a tube, was a direct blow to the geocentric model of the universe that had held for over 1,000 years. The scientific revolution didn't have a single cause, and it's important not to oversimplify a complex intellectual shift. But the glass lens was one of its essential physical tools. Microscopes revealed the world of cells and microorganisms, the foundation of modern medicine and biology. Telescopes revealed the structure of the solar system, the foundation of modern astronomy and physics. The glass invention that started as a bead in Mesopotamia had become the instrument through which humanity first began to understand the actual scale and structure of the universe. That's not a small thing. Let's come back down to Earth for a moment, literally, because there's another chapter in the history of glass that doesn't get enough attention, and it changed daily life for hundreds of millions of people. Glass windows. The Romans, as I mentioned, had experimented with flat glass windows. But for most of the medieval period, glass windows were rare, expensive, and mostly confined to churches and the homes of the wealthy. The famous stained glass windows of Gothic cathedrals, those were a luxury. Most ordinary buildings had windows that were covered with oiled cloth, wooden shutters, or animal horns shaved thin enough to let some light through. These let in either light or warmth, but rarely both. As glassmaking techniques improved through the medieval period and into the Renaissance, flat glass became gradually more accessible. And as glass windows spread into ordinary homes, a process that accelerated through the 17th and 18th centuries, something remarkable happened to how people lived. Buildings with glass windows were warmer and lighter than those without. People could work and read and sew and do detailed work by natural light without losing heat. And more than that, light-filled spaces tend to be healthier spaces. Sunlight has a natural sanitizing effect. Buildings that could be lit and ventilated without simply opening to the weather were, on average, less prone to the damp and darkness that contributed to respiratory illness and other health problems. Historians of architecture and public health have noted that the spread of glass windows in Northern European homes was likely one of several incremental factors in improving baseline quality of life before the germ theory of disease was even understood. Glass windows also changed what architecture looked like. Once you could have large, light-filled openings without sacrificing structural integrity or warmth, buildings changed. Rooms got bigger, spaces became more open. The relationship between inside and outside was transformed. All of that started with a pane of shaped, transparent sand. And now we arrive at the present, and this is the part I find genuinely staggering when you stop to think about it. Glass technology in the 20th and 21st centuries has taken two forms that most people interact with every single day without realizing it. The first is fiber optic cable. In the 1970s, researchers, most notably at Corning Glass Works, developed a method for producing extremely pure glass fibers, so thin and so optically precise that light could travel through them across enormous distances with very little loss. These glass threads, bundled together and laid in cables across ocean floors and under continents, now carry an estimated 95% or more of all international internet traffic. The conversations you have, the videos you stream, the searches you run, the vast majority of that data is traveling through glass. Not radio waves, not copper wire, glass fibers. Essentially, the same principle as a Venetian lens, shaped, purified glass bending and directing light, but applied at a scale and precision that would have been completely unimaginable even a century ago. The second is the screen. The display you are watching this video on, whether it's a phone, a tablet, a laptop, or a monitor, almost certainly has glass in it. Modern smartphone screens typically use a type of chemically strengthened glass, engineered to be thin, hard, and resistant to scratching. The LCD and OLED displays underneath that glass use layers of glass as substrates to support the pixel structures that generate the image. The camera lens on your phone is glass. The sensor cover is glass. You interact with a glass surface dozens, possibly hundreds of times a day, and it has become so natural that it has effectively become invisible. That invisibility is, in a strange way, the highest compliment you can pay to a material. Glass succeeded so completely that we stopped seeing it. So let's pull back and take in the whole arc, because the history of glass is really a story about how one transparent material built civilization, layer by layer, mostly without credit. It started maybe on a Phoenician beach, or more likely in a kiln in Mesopotamia, as nothing more than sand and heat combining into something new. The Romans scaled it and put it in ordinary homes. The Venetians refined it so far that the secret was worth more than a human life, worth imprisoning an entire island of craftsmen to protect. Then that same expertise in clarity and light bending produced the lens. And the lens produced eyeglasses. And eyeglasses produced microscopes. And microscopes produced modern medicine. And telescopes produced modern astronomy. And the whole chain of the scientific revolution ran through a shaped piece of glass. Glass windows brought light into ordinary homes, changed architecture, and quietly improved public health before anyone understood why. And today, glass threads carry the internet across the bottom of the ocean. And glass screens put the accumulated knowledge of human history in your pocket. Here's the reframe I promised you at the top. You are watching this video through glass. Your screen is glass. If you wear glasses or contacts, you are reading the world through glass right now. If you look out a window today, you saw the outside world through glass. If you used the internet today, you used glass. The material is everywhere, and it has been quietly foundational to almost every major leap in human knowledge and comfort for at least 2,000 years. And we almost never think about it. That's the glass invention story, and I think it deserves to be told. Quick note before you go, nothing in this video is financial, medical, or professional advice of any kind. This is history, explored for the love of it. Always dig deeper, check sources, and think critically. That's what this channel is for. If this got you thinking, hit like, it genuinely helps the channel grow. Subscribe to Object Origins if you want more stories like this. We cover the history of things that shaped the world, but rarely get the credit. And if you want to keep going right now, the next video is waiting for you. Fish, the history of discovery written in scales. Different material, same idea. Something completely ordinary hiding an extraordinary story. I'll see you there.